Good evening. We're live. It's Dr. Deep State. Welcome to our show this evening. We're going to talk about the NWO, the New World Order conspiracy freakout syndrome that people go into. Before I describe that and describe our guests a little bit, let me catch up with a little thing. If I don't have the links in the description, I know we got new people jumping aboard here. I always like to mention my two books, especially my current one, In Pursuit of the Metaverse, which really sums up everything we've done here on this channel for the last 7 years. If the link's not in the description section, both my books, Seeing Through the Singularity and In Pursuit of the Metaverse, will be at the top of the page there, Dr. Deep State. Also, I entered for the first time an opportunity to donate. I got some. Thank you, guys. My wife gave me the green light to do more of this. I've never said this personally before. I'll talk quietly. She's never watched a video. She's not into this stuff. But when she saw a little bit of money, she's like, okay, I can deal with it. So thank you. I love it. And that really inspires me. The locals, I'm getting over there. I put the opening date as June 10th to get my butt going on it. So I will leave a link for that. So far, it's just kind of my lame little introduction video over there. But the plan is I'm going to migrate over there, pretty much all my material, most of my attention. I'm going to do stuff on the almost daily, if not weekly, whether it's regular Q&A, analytics on what's going on in the world. I'll get in touch with you guys personally. So it's going to do this whole thing. You're going to hear me mention over and over, community, together, unique. It's kind of like, but that's my plan. I have a vision for this. I'm going to throw myself into what we're doing. The times, they really are a-changing. And I do have more than ever a unique perspective about what we do. I do believe that we're about to be encountering a new level of mimetic contagion. We saw it 20 years ago. We saw it a few years ago. And we need to prepare and be immune toward this. And we saw the events that have taken place in the last 24 hours. And you can see that there's a wind-up being going. And that's what we're here on Friday nights. Will and I are doing we're going to keep doing our shows on Tuesday. But those are going to be divided and everything's going over to the locals. So for now, just go over there, please. Just get a member and just kind of, there's not much to look at yet. I'm putting it all up there and getting it all set up over the next week and a half. Okay, so that's locals. We got everything else. We got our friend Aaron here and another guest from, you guessed it, Epiphany Parish in Tampa Bay, Florida. So we're going to talk a little bit about this phenomenon tonight. Aaron had to remind me, he goes, like, you talk about, before I forget, toward the end of this, we're going to do some Q&As. So if you've ever kind of wanted some feedback or something like that, we'll get into a few of them. Aaron sent me some good ones. I just got them. Okay. So Aaron reminded me, look, you talk about this stuff and you have to remember, like, a lot of people are new to this. You've been doing it a long time. I've been doing it a couple of years. So let's slow something down here and just maybe share people's experience of what it's like to kind of like, whoa, what's going on here? This paradigm and going on, and just what that experience is like, or trying to, and you've probably heard these stories, sharing it with friends, family, coworkers, or not sharing it, which is probably a better idea in most cases. And just that a phenomenon, and how we as a community here, especially over on locals, can take that in mind and kind of deal with people for wherever they're at in their journey into the church, Christianity, waking up, all of the above. Okay, without any further, you know what? Before I introduce my guest, why don't you give us a quick howdy and a shout out there, Aaron?
Pretty excited to have Michael on tonight. So yeah, we've been having a pretty robust conversation down here these last few days, especially kind of a kickoff from some of the things you've been talking about, and how to weave the stress of these realizations in with not freaking out, and how to battle between what should I do to prepare and how do I stay focused on my spiritual life. And so the reason I'm so happy to have Michael on today is because Michael's he's the one I mentioned last time that says, I look around, I don't know anything about you guys, but I just love you all. And so Michael is the guy that's always in a good mood all the time. Even when he's upset about something, it sounds like you should be happy about it. So one of the things we talked about was how he has kind of gone through this red pill depression, how, once you see what it is and you start to realize how bad it is, you're just like, what am I going to do now? So I'm looking forward to hearing what he has to say about.
Excellent. Thank you. And I got to catch up one of these times. I think I mislabeled Aaron's career and he wanted me to catch up. But in the meantime, I can't remember exactly what I called him, but he doesn't like to talk about it all the time exactly. But it would be like the Air Force equivalent of the SEALs or something like that. He was an officer. He's around the world. So that gets a little bit closer in the ballpark, I think, for his comfort level. He had to send me one of the videos to kind of show me they're a badass group, and he doesn't want to talk about it right now. So, Michael, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. Pace vobiscum a tutti, to everyone.
Excellent. So let's start out with this. And I think I'm going to remind both of you to kind of get as close as you can to your mics there. Okay. And so my impression of Tampa is, I bet 65% of the people weren't born in Tampa. Were you one of the ones that wasn't born in Tampa?
I, in fact, was not. I was born in Memphis, Tennessee, but I came here when I was, I think, between 1 and 2. I think I may have celebrated my second birthday here.
Okay, so you've spent some time in Mississippi. That's good.
Yeah, a little bit.
A couple of your suburbs are the fastest growing ones in Mississippi up there. Okay, so you're originally from Tennessee, and you can go wherever you want with your story. Where do you want to start, Michael?
Well, I guess we can start a little bit from the beginning, how I got into all this, because I was not raised Catholic, although my father was Catholic. He was from a Bavarian Catholic family from Wisconsin, but unfortunately I wasn't raised Catholic. I always had a extreme attraction and a really love and like of the spiritual, and especially the sacred. As I look back now on days of wine and roses, shall we say, I always really enjoyed that element, whether that was in literature and poetry, things of that nature. I ended up being an English major in college. That was probably an early seed that it'll be a leitmotif that runs through tonight. So I was trained very early to pick stories apart, characters, leitmotifs, themes, settings, all sorts of things that go into a really good story. In fact, I'm always a sucker for a really good story, whether it be very short or, rather complex. After I finished college, whilst in college, I studied Italian for some strange reason.
Can we ask where you went to college?
I went to the college in the University of South Carolina.
Okay.
Fighting Gamecocks.
Okay.
Yeah, I know, Bama. There, I studied Italian, and I picked it up for not obvious reasons. I was interested in doing some traveling, and let's face it, meeting pretty Italian girls. I ended up just picking it up really well. One of those things in life, kind of like some people are math people, I ended up being kind of like a language person. I never had to study for it.
Okay.
So I ended up in Italy after college, just avoiding all responsibility, looking for trouble. And I ended up meeting my wife, who is the key figure to lots of things. And with my wife, we built a family. And it was with her that I converted to becoming Catholic. This would be 1996.
Okay. Excellent. So she is from Italy.
She is. Yep.
And does she like Tampa Bay? Okay. Does she like being
in
America?
Yeah, she loves it here, actually.
Okay. Excellent. And then at some point you got into the TLM over there at Epiphany.
Yeah, but leading up to that, so my wife just gave me a really good example of holiness, of virtue, of how to live life, and that was the impotence of me. I wanted my children raised Catholic. I wanted our family to have Catholic basis to it. But here's another great theme in my story, is that I have always been surrounded by just fantastic, wonderful, and very good priests. It's been a blessing in my life, just in and out. In Bergamo, I was in the north of Italy when I met my wife. She's actually from the south. I was catechized by a very good priest. Now, I do switch languages a little bit because we speak Italian at home, but it's an important reference because in Italian, you'd say this person is buona. And buona doesn't quite translate into good. Buona has just that really earthly, good, motherly, fatherly, like you're hugging a relative's good sense of that Mediterranean warmth and hug. And in fact, the priest that catechized me was a little bit taken as the parish fool. He was older. He was a bit, maybe a little bit spotty for some people. He wasn't, jingling the cash drawers, but he was just such a good man, and he really was a large part of it. May Bonanima, as they would say. May rest his soul, Don Apis. We moved back to Florida, here to Tampa, and right away I sought out an Italian mass here in Tampa. And sure enough, as many people know it, or perhaps don't know it, there was always a smattering. There used to be, the Italian parish, the German parish, the Ukraine parish, the Polish parish. As those died down little by little, they ended up maybe having one mass they would have the Polish mass, the Italian mass, and they had that. So we went there, and then we encountered two very good priests. One has passed away, unfortunately. One's still with us, and they've been with us for 20-something years. And it was through those guys that just, they're brothers of the Order of Mercy, Mercedians, and just this very good Mediterranean sense. They weren't really like they have been spiritual directors by example, as more as like teaching. So I always got I just had this very good sense of being around them. I'm sorry I can't go into it. Maybe words will come to me later. Anyways, so we were going and not going, being busy, Novus Ordo Catholics. When I think I was telling Aaron this the other day, when there were cringy moments at other ones, because again, we would only go to this Italian mass once a month. So we'd go to one closer to our house. And if there were cringy moments, I'd kind of hit the pause or the mute button, and I would remember their homilies. I would remember everything that they said in the Italian mass. I found the music to be much better at the Italian mass because they were all Marian songs. All the songs that they would sing for hymnals would be Marian songs. And then when I go to the other Novus Ordo parishes around me, they're all really Protestant stuff that I remember from my childhood, going to it was Church of Christ, I think my mother belonged to, in Wisconsin. And there was these really, I was like, what's all this Protestant stuff? I want these beautiful Marian songs. And so the lockdown comes, and this was so Florida opens up a little bit earlier than most places. I think a little bit early even in Texas. And by chance, I went to a men's conference 2 or 3 years previously, and I met a fellow there who was an Epiphany member. And it's one of those weird situations. I have not run into him since. I thought that I did, because he's a very large man, very big, older linebacker-y type of fellow. And every guy that I ran into my first 2 or 3 years at Epiphany, I'd say, well, where is this dude? So, if you want to go there, we can go there. If that was, maybe if he was like the Archangel Michael or Gabriel, he kind of put on a couple pounds. Yeah. So anyways, the cut forward, we end up going to Epiphany because it was the only gig in town.
Okay.
And lo and behold, who is the priest who's celebrating that mass? But one of the Italian priests who we had been known for 20 years. And, we were home from that point on. And
okay. And one of the things, most of the members there will tell you that this is a unique place. And so
Indeed.
Once you got it, it's a nice tight fit, and everybody, yeah. Excellent. Yeah. Excellent. So I think you got us up to speed about just about everything. I think
that's kind of the laundry room story of how, I don't have a lot of the themes I want to touch on tonight. I really don't have that really, dramatic road to Damascus conversion story. Mine's a slow trod and push forward. So and it's neat that you all speak Italian at home. Yes.
Yeah. And so whatever dialect you kind of learned it in, she's probably got a unique Southern dialect down there. So you've probably kind of tuned into that kind of way.
Oh, yeah. We do actually we speak a mix of English, the Sicilian dialect, and of course, Italian. I'm fortunate enough to have 3 children. They're all married. So my daughter's husband is actually, my son-in-law is actually Portuguese Cuban. So we're actually have that in the mix as well.
A quick story. For years I had, this in New York City, I had a Italian girlfriend. And she would tell this story. She's from Bologna. And she'd have one set of grandparents that are from 10 miles on that side of town, and another set, mother set over here, father set on that time. They'd come over on Sundays together they didn't know Italian. They both spoke a dialect, and
Right.
the grandkids would have to translate to one another, and they couldn't even understand the standard stuff going on the television. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah,
People don't realize just how scrambled. And because of television, and they had to pick, a standardized kind of way of speaking, there is some way of communicating, but I don't think Americans can kind of grasp just how
No,
fragmented
not at
it is
all.
over
I mean,
there.
the closest thing would be real hardcore Southern colloquialisms, sayings, and things of that nature. But it doesn't get dialectical. It doesn't become, in fact, a different language. And that's true. Even valley to valley next to each other. In most countries in Europe, it's like that. And in fact, television plays a large part of that in Italy. In fact, television is what made the Italians speak Italian and not so much dialect.
And what is interesting, though, if you go back to Dante, it's almost untouched, but yet the language, the written, okay, you got it. Okay, you're still hanging in there with us, Aaron? Good. Do you want any input so far, Aaron?
Well, I think he touched on a point that I think everybody can identify with, or not everybody, not you, of course, but most of us out here, was that moment whenever they locked everything down and said, hey, you can't receive the sacraments anymore because of this virus that's out there. That was the moment that Epiphany itself exploded. And, we've talked before about how long you've been looking at this problem, how many years. For you, I think 9/11 was the wake-up call, and then kind of understanding the differences between what you're being told and versus what you're seeing. And so the conversation tonight is us kind of looking at this problem where, like, we went through it kind of as a group at Epiphany. And why we're bringing up Epiphany is because I travel a little bit, and when I'm traveling a little bit, I have to go to masses at different places. And if anybody's ever traveled, you can see that it's nothing like your home parish. But it's beyond that with Epiphany. There's an element there of people that I think is unique, that I think if people can understand what's happening there and capture what we're doing as a group and try to emulate that in your local area, try to find that network, that community, which is a big part of this conspiracy freakout syndrome and recovering from it, is you feel like you're the only person out there that knows what you know. And you can't talk to the people that you've been closest with for years, even sometimes your own family members, like your own wife, my wife's all bought in, but that leaves you feeling isolated. We recently added another member of our parish. She had no idea that there was anyone else out there, even at our parish. So Anne comes into our group, and just an amazing addition, just of all the stuff that she's been looking at, and the conversation that we've had over the past couple of days with her in the group. But I think the biggest part, and this is what me and Michael were talking about day before yesterday, was as you're feeling this sense of isolation, there really are an enormous amount of people out there that are going through this. So if you have the courage to reach out and to look around and to maybe say a few words here and there, I don't really know how you find people. I found it because I just said it, and someone said, oh, that's what I think too. And KC has been a big part of that, where he's just, he doesn't know a stranger, and strangers wish they didn't know him. So that's kind of funny. So I want to keep going back to that problem set of how do you deal with this isolation? How do you deal with this problem? And I think as we move through the conversation, what I hope we get into is the difference between the reality that's being presented to us, this egregore that you've been talking about, versus the reality of the church. We talk about that a lot, but the danger of the people fall into that don't have that reality, that salvation history that they can look at and understand things in context, is that you start going down all of these other rabbit holes. And you and I were talking about this, Dr. Haugen, about that you talk to them 3 years later and they're still looking at.
Yeah, Aaron and I were talking, and here's kind of the point of this. You just reminded me, Aaron. Here's the deal. There is a reality. That's what my whole book is about, of the pursuit of the metaverse. And when you go down, there's a lot of lingo out there about, the matrix and this and simulation and this kind of stuff. And when you go down there, it is naturally one of the philosophical terms is the ground of being. Your connection to God shifts, like the rug got pulled under you. And I've never talked about this online. That's why it kind of intrigued me to talk about this a little bit. But there were times like I went through a 3-month period of my life once. Each day, like the rug got pulled out from under me. I mean, massive things day after day after day, like discoveries, and it would lead to a new question. And there's a lot of isolation and all that. Here's the thing. There's a point to wake up, and some people can go year after year in this rabbit hole and that rabbit hole, and you get stuck and you come back years later. Where the point that we're doing this tonight, and if we do it again, the point is you always have to return. And I guess we got a lot of Protestants watching, and that's okay, I guess. You always have to return to the bosom of the church. If you're not Catholic, it is scripture, but your problem there, with all having sola scriptura, you're going to have a million different ideas, crazy Zionists, anti-Zionists, and anything in between. The bosom of the Catholic Church cannot have any contradictions. And you know what? Before I get on your story here, Michael, let me just throw this out. So we got some questions going on.
Sure.
Somebody asked me that there's a lot of long ones. Like people ask me, this would take me, some of these questions would take, I'd have to write multiple essays to answer these things. But let me just go a quick one right here that's really good. Well, first one, are y'all sedevacanists yet? I think that was probably to me and Will. We'll skip that one. I won't go into it. Obviously, we're not. We're here. But there was one here that said how it was just intriguing. Where did I see it? I'll have to come back to it. Okay, here's what it basically said. You gave me a bunch of them. So basically said if the Pope Francis is a globalist, or I think it ever said like a Satanist or whatever, how can he be infallible? And that's, again, I'm not an apologist over there. There's a lot of I mean, my goodness, it's a cottage industry out there. Everybody's doing it. After 2 weeks, they want dollars for it. Anyway, we won't get into this. There's very unique criteria for when he speaks. It's not like he's going to say, I want a ham sandwich. Aha, this is a peanut butter and jelly. It's not like that. There's very specific rules, and it doesn't happen very often. And that's why the whole influencer Catholic world can kind of sit there and analyze, but what he says on an airplane and yada, yada, yada. So it's structured in a way it's almost impossible for him to actually speak something that would technically be, problematic or something that would probably be
a canon lawyer for a lot of that stuff.
Yeah. And you got a whole canon of around the world. There's thousands and thousands of Catholics looking at everything. And so he can say some crazy stuff, but if it's again on an airplane or whatever, calling people faggot, I said it.
I've got something to add about that. I'm not an expert. I'm not a canonical expert or anything like that. And I want to go back to your point about the bosom, because I believe that's what Aaron wanted me to riff on. Yeah. I won't repeat it, but the actual word for the faggotry that he used in Italian, interesting to note. So Bergoglio is of an Italian family raised in Argentina. Probably they spoke Italian within the family, as immigrant families do, a little bit longer than it would be here. However, the word that he used in Italian is not something that a non-native speaker would stumble upon. And I just want to throw this out there. He would have heard that word being spoken by other native Italians.
Is it kind of, did he use the street version kind of, or slightly vulgar? Or is
no. I mean, it's considered a little bit impolite, and it's rough. It's very rough, very rough.
So it translates in English that way. Okay.
Yeah. But the point I want to make out is that he that's not something that he would have been riffing on, as he tends to do sometimes. He would have heard that word spoken by somebody in his inner circle. Full stop.
Yeah, and I have, like, Protestants, I mean, you're here because you're probably curious. A lot of those Catholic questions, once your mind is open, just go to 101 Apologetics. And if you have an open mind, they just start falling away. I mean, mine just crashed. I just never had the open mind to actually look at it. And if you're really interested, if you're a Protestant, you're struggling with, you go to the Methodist church and that doesn't fit you, and the Lutheran and their theologies. Open up even a modern catechism, start at the beginning, and it'll blow your mind just how the whole thing is laid out. And it's this one revelation from Christ that we fine tune over time, but it's one revelation. And yes, I don't want to go into it. I think there are some contradictions that are going on post-Vatican II that need to be worked out, but that's a kind of a separate thing. Let's get on to a little bit about you, Michael. Now, what we call, I guess they called it waking up. Now, I guess they've rebranded the word red pill.
Oh, yeah.
And woke got rebranded. So that's what we used to call it. My story was like before 9/11, I was doing research on the Project for the New American Century. So all my dissertation work was going into deep history and questioning that. But it really wasn't until the advent of YouTube that really did help me break away. And this would be about 11, 12 years ago. And then I just, so that's mine. And I can go into some of my stories, but I want to hear about you. How did this happen to you? Is it kind of a more recent thing?
It's been a slow drag. I have to thank my wife a lot. She points out a lot of things that again, with YouTube and having more access to non-mainstream media, that happened too. So, I mean, for me, again, it goes back to the early training in liberal arts education to pick apart things. You know, the philosophy classes, the psychology classes. I actually, you know, people make a good point about universities are kind of useless right now for certain things, and for certain degrees they are. But I want to make this very clear. I wanted to go to school and I wanted to read very difficult books, and I wanted very good professors to help me read those books. That was apart from the beer and the girls and stuff like that, which was in the evenings, that's what I wanted to do with university. I was not going to university for a career. I didn't want to come out a career accountant. I didn't want to go to marketing school. I wanted to read Ulysses by James Joyce. I went and did Dante for a couple of years. I mean, these are the things that I really wanted to go through. So I'd always been able to pull apart things and recognize, shall we say, patterns because of, again, it's leitmotif, it's character motivation, it's setting, it's things of that nature. So, for me, I've always had like a healthy, and this is what used to be so nice before the pill about the left, is that some of these leftier professors would point these things out and really, pick apart the man, so to speak. So that's really the impetus of it. In and around, I would have to say the first war in Iraq, which I just saw the dopamine coming off of all the news, and I'm like, hold on, man, that's pattern. That's something's wrong in Denmark. I've always kind of had this kind of not too bad of a Hamlet complex, but very putting on in the mousetrap play, things of that nature. So and I have three children, so life got in the way. So I kind of just put that to the side. Yeah. I always thought I was just being a bit rebellious in my thought, a bit contrarian. You fast forward up to, the past recent years with COVID and things like that. And I mean, crying out loud, I was standing outside in the Florida sun, 6 feet apart from people to walk into a grocery store. I mean, come on, man. So that's when it really everything just kind of fell apart as far as the whole narrative. And then I started just thinking like everything is dopamine based from the television. Everything from fiction that you see on television, everything from, the news. And I just felt, I felt duped, and I felt like I was being presented with really crappy stories, to tell the truth. I told you before how I love a good story. I was being fed just this terrible narrative, these terrible stories. I wasn't even interested to even, I thought it was really great, the K-fabbing stuff. I wasn't even interested in getting in those stupid discussions. They were that idiotic. And I do remember one night, and this coincides with going to Epiphany because, and I do want to pivot back to language a little bit. Again, I'm fortunate that I've had the opportunity to learn and speak another language because I was there and with my wife and other things. So when I look at the Latin, the other side of the missal in the traditional Latin Mass, I'm actually, for me, not only is it spiritual food and everything else that I need, it's also my weekly Latin class. I go through and I try to follow as much as I can in the Latin. And the purity of the language there is what really, sets things apart for me as well. And I was just seeing that was missing every single place. So while I'm going through all this, we have a wonderful men's group the Holy League at Epiphany that meets every 2 Thursdays out of every month. And we get thoroughly catechized there. And it's also an open forum for people to come in and ask questions. And as I'm going through this process, I was telling Aaron this the other day. I was sitting in my back porch one night, and it was probably like on a Friday night or something like that, and I was relaxing, and I just had this overwhelming, pardon the pun, or pardon the joke. I had an epiphany. I was just so tired of vice and sin. I was just like, Mamma mia, I can't take the effort. I'm sick of the effort that I have to put into to give into it, to fight it, to keep going with it. It's like I don't want to, this isn't the confessional booth. I don't need to go down every demon I've danced with, but let's just take lying, okay? Bearing false witness. I was so tired of little lies and the little lies that I have to tell about the little lies to make sure the other little lie doesn't get told. And I was just like, enough, basta. I said, that's it, man. I remember these clear words to myself. I said, I want a life of virtue. It wasn't anything that I read from the saints or even the scripture. I was like, I want a life of virtue. And again, a bit coming from the liberal arts background, I went straight to the cardinal virtues. And then from the cardinal virtues, and then I went right, I took a little deviation out into maybe perhaps ancient philosophy and ancient thought. But then, just like, Augustine said, he baptized Aristotle. I mean, I was right back into the catechisms, right back into, all the things that mattered, right back into scripture, right back into, the lives of the saints. The lives of the saints are tremendously important for me. And, that's one of the themes that I'll go on to next. So here I was in and around this time of lockdowns, right? And this actually came to be a really wonderful thing, which I'll be riffing on here, is that this ended up being the speech that I gave at my daughter's wedding last year. So as we were all hidden away, all right, so you mentioned to be in the bosom, right?
Yes.
The bosom, and then, what's inside the bosom but the beating heart of our Lord and, of Our Lady. So I started to think about, well, we're being hidden right now. We're in exile. We're, all these types of things. So once again, here comes the liberal arts training. I started like, well, crying out loud. They talk about wood a lot in the Bible. If you had to take all the, go through the Bible and just start picking out elements, wood, water, fire, wine, it's just all over the place. So I went away from those objects and I went to the concept of the hidden. So what do I mean by the hidden? So I'll reach back into a little bit into the wedding speech. What I told my daughter and her husband was that we live in a time of turbulent winds, the winds of mendacity, of modernism, relativism, all these types of things that are just besieging us. And at that time, actually, they got married a week after Easter, so I was able to use the metaphor of the Easter candle. I said, just like last week, when we lit the Easter candle, you two are two flames that have become one in a matrimony. And what is the flame's biggest enemy? It's the winds of everything that I just mentioned. So what is my advice to you? And I said, go after, and then I talked to the part about the biblical. I said, you need to go in hiding. That in our Catholic tradition and also part of the Bible, the saints and the Gospels. So let's just go through a few, all right? So first off, Adam and Eve, they're in the Garden of Eden. Where are they? They're hidden until the fall, obviously, okay? Moving a little bit forward, what is the story of Noah, the ark? All those, Noah, his family, and all those animals besieged by the waves of the world gone mad, chaos, pure chaos, hidden. Let's move a little bit forward. The Jews during Passover, they're behind their bloodstained doors, hidden, being passed over. Okay, go a little bit further. Our Lady, who's the ultimate metaphor or the theme of being hidden. She's the perfect tabernacle. This perfect girl in the middle of backwater nowhere Roman Empire is hiding, our Savior, the Lord, the King of Kings, once again, hidden. The apostles in the upper chamber, freaking out, no less, after, the events of the Passion Week, hiding again. So you can go on again. You can even say that Paul was hidden inside of Saul the whole time. So the
Yeah.
point I want to get to this with all this hidden stuff is that I just gave you a lot of examples of hidden. So let's break those apart a little bit. The hidden I'm talking about is not hiding from, let me get over here and do something bad and sin, or let me, run away out of fear. No, it's the hidden sense of preparing oneself and preparing and making oneself holier and putting into practice by, strengthening yourself for the greater glory of God. Apart from, maybe the Adam and Eve example where there was the fall, but, Noah, they had to withstand, they had to hide. They weren't hiding because they did something wrong. They were told to do it, and they were waiting for their time to spring forward for God's greater glory, for God's greater plan. Same thing with all those things. It's a hidden
Jacob in the well.
Inspiration.
Jonah in the belly of the fish and Jacob in the well. Yes, I like that, in the bosom. And I see the metaphor. I like that.
But it's not hiding out of fear. It's not hiding out of shame. It's the hidden of the fast. It's we're hiding from food, bread and wine. That's so critical to us Catholics. What does bread do? Bread is yeast that hides until it becomes bread. Wine, the same thing. It's a culture that becomes wine as it moves forward. You're in a progression that, maybe it's not something that happens click, 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 click. And that we've all been so baked into television narratives to think that everything's going to go and happen and change, whether it's going to be next week, you're going to have your road of Damascus moment, or it's going to be the next election cycle. It's not like that, man. Perhaps you need to just wait it out. I mean, one of the greater examples that I gave to them, and when I think finally, and a finer point happens to what's happening now, is that let's look at Saint Benedict. So what does Benedict do? After he's left, I believe he was around Bologna, like the people you mentioned. He was there in northern Italy. He goes down to Mount Cassiano, and he finds the place where all the other monks are there, and they're having a party. It's like a frat party there, from what I've understood. So what does he do? I mean, and again, they were in a pagan temple. So he gets rid of all those pagan gods. Gone, go away. He throws up and repairs the walls. He prepares and creates a monastery, and he creates a rule. The rule, he put order into chaos, but he had to do that by putting up the walls of the monastery. And we'll get to this part, which is community at the end. He created community by cleaning house, putting up walls, and putting in order. What Augustine called, tranquillitas ordinis, that the order of God. When your restless heart is finally found God, you're finally at peace. So that's what I told my daughter and her husband, that for a family, for them to get through these times, they need to make their life and their family and everything. They need to put up the walls, put in the order.
Yeah, let me make a comment about that, about some stuff I've been watching today, actually. But
sure.
I speak about the singularity, and that's the end of this Kabbalistic project, or it's called the Great Work in all of the societies. And what they all have in common, there's the biblical narrative, and it's the inversion of the biblical narrative. So what they're trying to do is break down all boundaries. There's always a thing and its opposite. It's destroyed, start over, destroyed, start over, destroyed. And the ultimate thing is to, whether it's the final vision of Karl Marx or Teilhard's vision of just all boundarylessness, or the of Jacquem's kind of third period, there's boundaryless. That's what's going on in the Tower of Babel. That's why we have all boundaries are broken down. So that's always been this typological destiny of the serpent. And so God wants boundaries. He set people out with their separate tongues, their separate nations, their separate identities. The Catholic integral order respected those boundaries, but yet could create a Christian empire. And that was the perfection of it. And that was simply because it was it's a Platonic type. It was ordained by God to make that order. So that we have to understand first and foremost. When we think the order of our mind breaks down, we're having the freak out syndrome or the rugs being pulled out from us. And it seems like, what's real? What are the boundaries? Sometimes you can just know this by finding out what's under attack: men versus women, the hierarchical structure of the family and society, the sacramental order that's been ordained by God. When you see those things under attack, we need to kind of cling to them, to cling to the truest reality, which is ultimately the bosom of the church. So when we see what's under attack and the agenda, it's to break down all boundaries. So I think it was very apt, Michael, that you were just speaking about the boundaries, and that's where we come into where we are now. About waking up, sometimes we have these presuppositions, or we have a paradigm, and oftentimes, maybe we do live in kind of a cave sometimes, and we've been given ideas maybe from our public school system or some kind of poor ideas about how the world works. All we have to do is question, is this off from traditional theology? And and if it is, we try to make our way back to that. I don't know if we'll get into it right now, but in my wake up experience, I wanted to go I always wanted to have one foot on the ground, but I wanted to check out every frickin', and I don't talk about it. I've been to every one. And I mean, I can talk about that a little bit, but what kind of, frankly, I'll just give you the short story, which moved me toward the church, is you are going to be spaced out with a lot of those holes. You need to reel it back in, and you need some concrete. And I'll just give you one. Cosmology has its place, but people can get lost there with that. But it has its place, if you know what I'm talking about, cosmology. The next one, I've never brought this up once on the show, but there's a whole thing that came after this. And a lot of these things are part psyop, but there's a there. And that there, when you keep chasing it and it never amounts to anything, back off that. If you've been looking at something, and one idea of that is hidden history, there's kind of a there. I mean, and mud flood and Tartarians, and that stuff will rot your mind, that quantum reality stuff. And that's kind of where I was playing around to see how far that went. And I'm just like, whoa, there is it's unexplainable. There's something there. And it's soul sucking, and when people that want to get lost in that spot,
the bait, of course, is that stuff's interesting. It really is. It's intellectually interesting. It's a good story. It's things
I love architecture and city planning, and it's a lot of this stuff is like, how did that get there? But it doesn't go anywhere. And some of it's unexplainable. It's almost like there's parallel realities, and then you're getting into this quantum stuff, and it's like it's time to get back to the bosom of the church. And what a good antidote for that. Read some Augustine, read some St. Thomas, and just really get grounded back into it. Because I always say reality is historical, it's hierarchical, and it's sacramental. And not just us partaking in the 7 sacraments, but ourselves offering us up in this cosmic realm as a sacrifice, as our bodies as a living sacrifice to our Savior.
No, I agree 100%. That's the I was saying also this to Aaron. One of the problem is when whatever color of pill it is finally goes down, there's a couple of elements to that. Okay, it's chalky. It does not go down easy sometimes, and you might have well, I can't believe I'm about to use feminism as a metaphor. So you have first wave pillism, okay? Yeah, and it goes down and you start seeing things, and you really get perhaps intellectually interested, and you start reading about concepts and peoples and ideas and theories and these things. And
I'm going to interrupt you because I know the metaphor. The first wave of feminism is actually just going back to the Constitution and thinking it through. I know where you're going to get to in the third wave. Go ahead.
So, so you think the pill's down there, but there's still perhaps residuals of the chalk that's going down. And perhaps at that second part, things start getting a bit depressing because a part of your work is you're like, well, man, maybe another group or force has really dominated my life as far as it's molded me culturally. It's molded my parents culturally. It's molded how I see the world through even relaxing and entertainment and fiction, how it's been done that in school. And that's very difficult to take. It's almost like, realize when you reach that adult moment and you realize that your parents aren't perfect people, you see them as true, fallible adults. And I think that's where the problem that's where you almost feel like you're caught in a corner and you're lashing out. And, it's easy to take the bait on this. I was saying this to Aaron the other day. It's not, I always find it, one of the things that I picked up on is that there's always a few names that are mentioned. It's like, why is George Soros's name always mentioned? You know what I mean?
There's a lot of boogeymen out there.
Yeah, just beware of the boogeyman. You're being boogeyman, right? So one of the things that I think that people need to do is that they need to, when you get to that point, and you need to back off, and you need to go into hiding, as I was mentioning beforehand. You need to fortify yourself to prepare yourself for the greater glory that God has prepared for you. Whether that's fasting, whether that's more prayer, maybe that's if you want to call it media diets or things like of those natures. Maybe you need to ask to be shown a particular saint and just read about that saint for a while. Or, for example, I'll find myself going to the Desert Fathers a lot because they're so sparse in their sayings and their maxims. I find a lot of comfort in the Desert Fathers because it's plain and simple.
Do you remember one of the authors of those? It's a nun from Oxford. Did you run across her?
No, I remember.
I had a tutorial with somebody she was one of the, like a person of note that really was one of the significant anthologies. At any rate, let me cook it over because you're in the back there, Aaron. Why don't you give us I want to give you a more specific question. A lot of people that were in the military woke up. It's very common. So something about that experience, either you're going to be, you've said it before, when you leave, you're either gung-ho, living in the past, or you kind of use it to grow and move on. But if you want to focus on just one part, when you've given your life to your country and the service of your country, and we find out that basically every vocation has been to some extent infiltrated, was that a hard pill for you to swallow that you've given? And I don't know if I'm sure you're okay with the question. I never asked you privately before. Was that kind of a difficult thing for you to that moment when you just kind of said, because I mean, whatever profession we had, you had to kind of think about like, wow, that wasn't really what I thought it was, or that wasn't what it was kind of cracked up to be. Was that something that was difficult for you to think through?
Yeah, I mean, think about it. If you were a doctor, and you got red pilled, or if you're a college professor and you got red pilled, it's everybody out there suffers from it. To me, it wasn't too bad because I just enjoyed the job itself. It never was about God and country. It was about the guys that you got to work with. They were such incredible people. So, but I remember because we deployed. We were in country on the September 11th. We were in country, I think September 23rd, and moving around the area to try to go do stuff. And but you didn't have time to think about all the evidence you were seeing that was contrary, because we were all like, this is ridiculous. What do you mean they found wallets at the base of the tower? And that looked like demolition. That didn't look like a plane. And so, but you're bought in at that point.
Just kind of put it on a shelf for a while and let it add up.
And so, then once you've been in it and everybody's kind of moved forward in this direction, well, we found the bad guy. Let's go. We don't have time to talk about what happened. Let's go get the bad guy. No, wait a second. Is he the bad guy? So you don't do that. And, I've said before, in the military, they don't teach you critical thinking. They teach you problem solving. They give you what the problem is, and then you go about resolving it. But I think the hardest thing in all of this was, it wasn't, because I never thought it was for nothing. You know what I mean? Because in the military, because the military is a big KFAB as well. It's they've done all of this work. Fox News is the military patriotism channel, right? So they do all this work to say, we got to support our troops. Like, why do you hate the American troops? Look at those poor troops. And then when you realize how the troops are being used and how military power is being pushed around the world and what it's for, it's like, stop with the whole support the troops nonsense. It's different than, that's a different statement than saying they sent them off to war. Now they come back, take care of them. Totally different. So I want to make sure I draw a clear line between taking care of those people that the government has abused through abuse of military service, and this notion that the military is all good and perfect and wonderful, because you don't get to be a 4-star general if you don't have some knowledge of what's going on. There's a lot of culpability the further up the rank you go. And I'll just give you an example of the fact that, like my buddy who's a chaplain in the Marine Corps, he's a priest, he's in the Navy, but he's stationed with the Marines. He's got to go to retirement ceremonies where he's presiding over them, and he finds out at the last moment that the retirement ceremony, the guy getting retired is married to a dude. And then anyway, the short version is the lieutenant colonel there compensates for the lack of acknowledgement that Father, my friend, and he didn't acknowledge the husband because he can't. He just said thank you to the first sergeant that was retiring. And then the lieutenant colonel comes in and says, and for you, John, blah, blah, blah. That lieutenant colonel, when he was a lieutenant, was talking about fags and homos, and they were making gay jokes and all kinds of stuff like that. He never in his wildest dream would he have ever thought he would be up there on the stage doing what he was doing. So and then there's the whole vaccine where they had to go through that forced, or you had to get out or take the shot. And these officers lined up one after another. These senior NCOs lined up one after another to go ahead and do this. So there's a lot of culpability in the military for allowing this machine to continue. And the thing that I'm most afraid of is that without this critical thinking happening, that whenever they say, you go here and do this to these people, and it's going to be us, they're going to do it. Those cops are going to do it. They're not going to follow the Constitution. They're not going to do what they need to do. They're going to come after us, and because it's an order. So I think, kind of going back to your question, for me, it wasn't such a big thing for that realization, but the hard part was recognizing the humility that I was lacking. Because if you're going to go into this world, and it'll suck you down into the pits of doubting everything. You mentioned fake history. Anyway, so there's an enormous amount of humility that you have to learn, that you're not as smart as you thought you were, and you didn't know what you thought you knew. And I think for me, that humiliation to get to a place where I'm okay not knowing, I'm okay not being the smartest guy in the room. Never was, but I used to think I was. And it goes back to when you understand your faith, when you turn around, you're like, okay, I was fooled. I did a lot of bad things, hurt a lot of good people, possibly.
And some people have too much pride to go there.
Right. I can't.
They're frankly not secure enough, I think. Yeah. But, most of the people, when we have a change, usually it's because to some extent we're broken down, or as Michael just said, you had a moment of self-reflection about vice, and I think that's always a little part of it. Like when we get kind of broken down, it's like, I've tried doing this my way, and maybe it's just something's not working here. So before I get back to Michael, and I think he's waiting here, he's got another comment about his process of thinking things through. I got a question here from Aaron, and I'll throw one out that I think I can cut. Some of these are they would be complicated, like that the Islamic faith is a manufactured faith. I can give you references to some people that have whole series of lectures on this. I can do that. Somebody talked also about what's going on, that just the many interest groups involved over there in Israel. That would take a long time to unpack. Here's one that I can do a little bit quicker, and then I want to get back to waking up, or whatever we want to call it nowadays. Thank you for bringing up page 41 of the Jewish Encyclopedia 1906, but it is not the Canaanites, I don't believe. It is the Edomites that were incorporated in 1925 BC under King John. The Edomite hybrids then formed Judea, and that we're talking about the seed of the woman and the seed of the man, that this kind of thing. Who are the Jews? I suppose this is the idea here. The Edomite hybrids then formed, quote unquote, Judea. That is where Herod came from. Interesting point. All caps. Nobody talks about this. before all the blood was tainted by Edom, Jesus came back. Furthermore, they invert everything because they call Rome Edom. Yes, I do this in Seeing Through the Singularity, and I go to that point. Herod was an Edomaean or an Edomite, and so he was part of the elite. That strain had definitely been in there. This is a complicated story. So I've always called them Edomites, especially in Seeing Through the Singularity. And I even traced it back to the Gideon Bible and the infiltration of the Levites and that strain to the extent that it existed, and I could pull it out of scripture. So that's in Seeing Through the Singularity. And I said, yes, they invert it. When you hear all these crazy rabbis going, we're going to kill Amalek, or we're going to kill Edom, and Edom is Christianity, or it is Rome, and they say that, and it is an inversion. Here's what I said in Seeing Through the Singularity. What they're doing in the Christian narrative, in the Christian singularity at the end of time, Christ takes the weeds and the tares, and he decides, who's going to be on my left, who's going to be on the right, the goats and the sheep. He decides. So in these people that are their own Messiah, they're taking, the revelation of the Zohar takes revelation and anti-revelation. So that's the dialectic, right? And they're the messianic class, the enlightened class that are going to create this new world order through this dialectic. Anyway, they fancy them, they're taking the place of God. So when they're doing that, they're going to decide who's going to end up on the thrashing room floor. That's depopulation, in my estimation. I threw that out as an idea because I worked the whole thing as an inversion. And I do say, yes, we are Jacob, Christians, the heel grabber, and the younger brother. And again, all these, when we call them the older brother, that sounds good when they change that in Vatican II, but the full reality of that typology is there's an enmity between the brothers, okay? And so what I was mentioning with the Canaanites, this new information, and there's a couple articles, maybe I'll throw them up now on the locals, but the stuff that the UNS review is uncovering, this is a fascinating thing, both from Carthage and the Phoenicians. That's an ancient part that still exists in the DNA, and it's much more powerful than the Khazars. And so what you're getting from that, and there was an integration, actually came through Italy and marrying some Gentiles and up there, that kind of explains, there's a lot of dispute between the blood analysis, but that's the Canaanite piece of this, because the Phoenicians were Canaanites and the whole child. And I think that, as well as the Babylonian captivity, felt into this amalgamation that would become the mystery school and the Talmud and so forth. I'll finish this by saying it's both. Catholicism oftentimes can be both and. So they are Edomites, but I'll leave you with this scripture. When Christ, his whole mission goes toe-to-toe with the typology that we need to address right now, the synagogue. He goes toe-to-toe with the synagogue, and he says, ye are a generation, meaning there's some bloodline going on here. I'm going to call it spiritual, but there's some bloodline going on here, at least on that side of the cross. You're of a generation, a brood, a generation of vipers. Your father was a murderer from the beginning. He's giving it away. They're Canaanites. He's calling them out. The Canaanites, and so I think it got in there through several avenues, a combination. And to finish that off, right on the BC side, but the 1st and 2nd century, and UNS has this information from many historical sources. Some of the strongest conversions on this side of the cross was the Carthaginians and the Phoenicians, but on this side in the first two, it was Edomites, straight up Edomites. So you have a ton of both that would create this thing called rabbinical Judaism, both in the spiritual sense, and I think there's a lot of genetics that go there. The safe ground to deal with this is to call it a spiritual thing for our discourse, because otherwise people call you're talking about some crazy serpent seed kind of stuff. So anyway, I touched on that a little bit. I don't want to get too far carried away. I want to get back to you, Michael. Talk us. I like all these literary themes and stories you're telling. That's a good way to kind of see and make sense of what's unfolding right now before us. And again, part of why Aaron wanted to do this on Friday nights and connect these kind of ideas, getting to the bosom, getting to scripture, getting virtuous, back to waking up and what do we do with this information. What he's doing here and why we're creating a community is so that we don't feel isolated, that we have some solid kind of parameters to how to think about this, But I'll remind everybody again, the stories that are coming out this week, these people that do this, these Phoenicians, they're the masters of script, right? They're the master playwrights of the ages. And then the black nobility is a good kind of way to kind of how they kind of penetrated Europe about 800 years ago. They're the masters of Hollywood, right? They're the master screenwriters. So between the dialectic between East and West and Islam and Christian in America, between the blue team and the red team, once you get sucked into the simulacrum, the contradictions, like Michael mentioned, back after Iraq War, you'd watch the Fox News. It was not truth, just making sure that you're going after CNN, and CNN's not interested in truth, just making sure. And when you kind of get sucked into that, you lose truth and you don't have a position, because I know I hate that guy, so I must be on this team. That's the game they play, and it's most obvious in American politics. And
elsewhere.
Yeah, who wants to have Weekend at Bernie's guy? I mean, in what real world would this guy actually be running? How did he even make it the last 4 years? Like, but they're making the script so dramatic right now that they're actually going to roll this guy out, or a skeleton, or whatever 5G image. Is the guy? It's really
everything? Perhaps it's always been this way. And I'll bring another intellectual source up here in a moment. It's all out of freaking central casting. Aaron and I were talking about this the other day. So, I mean, I know that there are useful idiots, and then there's probably highly functional, intellectuals, yet idiots at these upper echelons and perhaps in some of these working groups. But, I mean, for example, the World Economic Forum. I mean, come on. There had to have been a focus group. Let's put a German guy with a German accent that,
I've always said that. It's just 70% comical.
Of the world grew up watching World War II movies, and then we have the evil Nazi meme placed in our head so much now.
Dr. Evil
dressing up in a Star Wars costume. I mean, come on! You're telling me
they're punking everybody. They're punking. But the point is, all conspiracy theories were put out, so it's not a conspiracy anymore. Yeah. But it is. They are cut out characters, and now that he stepped down, it's becoming more obvious than not. It's the face of the synagogue, so they can still throw out.
I mean, come on. You couldn't have waited a couple generations before you're going to put the guy with the German accent on there? So that World War II was at least 2 or 3 generations gone? Anyways.
And the stuff that Yuri Harari, he's just so over the top. You all are useless eaters, and we're going to have you playing video games and drugged up. And it's just so in your face. And yet there's people that will hear that, and I don't know. But yes,
to the point. Okay, to the point. So you're hit with all this stuff. Okay, so let's talk about dealing with it a little bit. And so again, just pivoting back to my notion of the hidden. Okay, my hidden is not putting your head in the sand and not viewing the world, because let's go back to putting up the walls at the monastery or putting up the parapets. If you're going to be fortifying, I mean, you're still looking outwards. You know what I mean? One of the things that that the monasteries did that built Europe and built Christendom is that they built communities. When they had the order inside, everyone started coming to them, because you had that whole, this may happen, the whole Roman world and structure just was falling apart at the time of Benedict. Remember, at the time of Jerome, when he was translating the Vulgate, okay, the skeleton, there was still a bit of meat on the bone, and there was still some skeleton into Roman culture, into Roman society, into Roman law and order, so to speak, okay? The police, the roads, things, trade, perhaps, at that time. You fast forward and you get to Benedict, all that's falling apart, and they're kind of deep into the Christian history, you know what I mean? They were pivoting back to pagan gods. So let's figure out how to deal with this. Is that once you've established those walls, once you've established that order, once you've prepared yourself in a bit of a hidden and protective sense, it's time to branch out. It's time to look forward, like they did in the monasteries. There would have been no agricultural science. Beer drinkers of the world, Protestants, hello. I mean, come on, you should be thanking monasteries for that alone. That should make Protestants Catholic alone. It's just their devotion to good, Abbey beer. wine, agriculture, science, clocks. You know, I mean, you know why clocks were invented? So they could go pay the hours.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like that. I feel like the Monty Python movie. So what are the Catholics done for us lately? You know what I mean? The roads, that old joke from the movie. Anyways, that's where it needs to stem for. And I say this many, many times, is that God knows that we need good, holy, masculine, diocesan priests. But we also need, and this is very much a part of my story, because I was very close to priests who were in the order. We need the orders. We need monks and we need nuns. Go and spiritually, metaphorically, and physically hug these people, interact with them, find free time to go help them and spend time with these people, eat with them. It's vitally important, because it was out of those communes, those communities, communis, with one communis, community comes from. That's how it all branched out. That's how Christendom became Christendom to a certain extent. That's how that torch was passed. And I'll let you interject now, and I can give some examples about how it's done at Epiphany.
Excellent. I want to get back. I wanted to do that. So we're going to hook that up. On this side, Christendom and the creation of it. And the only way this was possible, that the whole of the world was pagan, that this thing came out if it was ordained by the blood of Christ and the blood of the martyrs, and it was ordained by God, was the only way this civilization was created. Number one, on the other side, we're going to get back to Epiphany. And here's how I'm going to fill this in with conspiracy. I've said this before, but I have watched the Christian truther channels for years and years and years. And sometimes I go back and check in on what they're doing. And here's the deal. When you go down, there's a conspiracy wherever you're going to look, in any profession, in any country, in anything, and certainly in the Catholic Church. You know, especially they're there. You're going to see it. You're going to see it. Here's the deal, Protestants. Here's the deal, how it works. Christ said, I will make a church, and in my church, there'll be wheat and tares. And so, like the disciples said, should we go and grab them, or should we go and leave the church? And no, at the end of time, I'll put the sheep over here and the goats over here, and I'll thrash, and the tares are going to be on the floor. That's up to me. Your job is to get into the bosom. So here's what I'm saying. You know, that's why history brings you back to this. Like, if you think history began in 1776 or 1517, you just don't have the thread. You would not have a scripture. There was no Bible for damn near 400 years. You know, we were talking about the Japanese when they were martyrs. There was no Bible around. You know, so you have the order to go out and baptize all nations, create a civilization, was accomplished. All the marks of Christ, the mystical body, is living in history. That's what's played out right now. And the only person that really has the marks of this is the Catholic Church. So with all the scars, and that's the tears throughout history that Christ promised would be there. But what he does have, and you have evidence of it, he grew a Christian civilization that branched out into other boats and so forth. Yes, for sure. And I had one more thought, but I think I lost it. But yes, so you have to be able to kind of see that what these Protestants end up doing, all of them, because the Methodists, there's a conspiracy there back, Adam, and so they end up by themselves putting their metaphorical pope hats on and getting an audience. And they just become conspiracy theorists and maybe slap a Bible verse on at the end. I was kind of basically doing that after a while. And it's like, something either way. This is not right. And, I studied history at Oxford. So I had a background that, like, I couldn't just totally just kind of negate that. Although you watch all these, Protestant hating on everything, and there's a conspiracy there. And granted, right now in the church, the tares are pretty much in control of the top level. I will grant you that. But here is what I'll say, finally, to finish this off with the Orthodox. Because, again, that's where we're at with the passion. You're getting it from the agnostics. You're getting it from the atheists. You're getting it from the science, the naturalists. You're getting it from the Protestants. You're getting it from the Orthodox. That's Christ. He's getting it everywhere. Who's going to walk with him to the cross? And what I have to say about Orthodox, because they like to, rail on the Pope, the papacy, and they do have, they have a point. And I can't hate on the Orthodox. I don't mind them. But here's what I'll say. The fact that the Catholic Church right now, because they're just bashing the church right now, the Orthodoxy, the chair of Peter was never real. How could this be? Look, aren't you embarrassed to have this guy talking right now? To me, that's complete validation, vindication, affirmation that this is Christ's church, because it is the mystical body being played out in precisely the way we had the ministry of Christ, and now we have the passion of Christ, and the church will invariably have to go underground. And so to me, it's like, oh, that makes me want to go back into the bosom of the church. It's complete affirmation. But nobody will respond that way, because at Catholic Answers, they don't want to admit that there's anything wrong, and that's getting inverted on themselves at some point. And what Will and I are going to talk about that on Tuesday, the three things that are going to bring us into the egregore. Okay, Michael. So we have on the one side Christendom, and there is no way this is possible. This idea that humans, by virtue of being alive, have dignity. They're made in the image of God, and that's the centerpiece of this new civilization. That's going to be, something that values life. We know that's falling up. Okay, I'm going to shut up. And now, I like what you said. The monasteries as like the sort of center, the heartbeat of these communities in Christendom, and the church and the sanctuary and the tabernacle, and all of these things are just. It's just this continuation. There's really just one religion in the world, and it's being played out now in the new Israel, in the new Jerusalem. And these are all just symbols of the world to come. And so now Epiphany, you see this as in real time. And I'll say it too. I went to Epiphany. I'd never seen anything like you all. Just sense of community, the actual mass itself. It was a trip. It was really a trip. And just the fact that we could feed off you guys here for weeks to come. I mean, what other church can you do that from? So I've talked too much, Michael. Go ahead.
No. You made some really good points, and it brought up something. I don't have it all memorized. I do have a little bit of a notepad here, but something that Athanasius Schneider said. He said, "Culpable ignorance leads to eternal damnation." So, I mean, we need to. I mean, Mamma Mia, guys, we need to those. Again, let's go back to the communities, okay? So let's do another quick community example, and I'll pivot around. Aaron knows me from going all over the place, so hopefully I'll be able to reel him back in. So here's another great example, okay? So you've got these crazy Irish monks in Ireland, okay? Ireland, think about the weather there. They're beaten up by the wind, they're living in these rocks, and they build these communities. So they eventually make their way, Colombian makes his way from Europe, from Ireland, and starts working his way back down into Germany, into France, and eventually down into Italy, rebuilding all these communities that were, you would have thought that they were already there, but they weren't. So to your point, for the one true church, the example of there with this community and this theme of community is there time and again. And again, it's all from the walls of the monastery, and that they break out. So I just want to make a couple more points about that. It's outside of the walls, there were the gardens, the field.
It's almost like the arteries and the
it's the heart. That's again the hidden, the heart. One of the saints that I find that I venerate very much is Saint Filippo Neri. His heart burst from asunder because it was so big. That's the beating heart is our religious life people. Our priests, our monks, our nuns. So I mean, again, I can't stress that enough. Pardon the repeat button. So let's pivot to Epiphany a little bit. So I'm gonna go outside the walls of shall we say the metaphorical monastery of Epiphany, because it all starts at the altar. It all starts with the Eucharist. Then we move to the pulpit, and then we move to the confessional. That is the beating heart of Epiphany, 100%. However, outside the walls of those things, we have tremendous examples, and this is what I want to offer people. So if you've taken that pill and it's a little bit chalky, and sometimes maybe all the medicine hasn't gone into your system, you're going to go into these freak out moments. whether you're alone, you don't have community, or the closest thing to a community is something like this, don't worry, because again, I mentioned that part about hiding and preserving yourself for the greater good of God. Remember, when you have a fever, as the fever is just breaking, you have a bit of euphoria to you. You think that you're going to go out and do so many things. I caught what we have here in Florida. We call it a typical summer cold. The heat starts coming, you're in and out of air conditioning, and you feel like, you catch a cold for a couple of days. And, I had a fever. And when it was breaking, I was like, dog, and it was Memorial Day weekend, and I was really angry. I'm like, I always get sick when I have a day off from work. I said, know what? Tomorrow I'm going to go do this. I'm going to do my favorite activity. I'm going to mow the lawn. And, I woke up the next day feverless and over the sickness, but I was exhausted. So you're going to have that euphoric moment. And that euphoric moment might propel you to say things, do things, speak out publicly about topics and things of that nature, when in and of itself is not a bad thing. However, remember, if you prepared yourself in the hidden, waiting for God's greater glory, you're going to refine and strengthen yourself. So when it comes time to unsheath that sword, it'll be sharp and it'll be ready to be used. Mentally, you got to have a lot of love. Well, sometimes I don't like to use love so much. You have to have charity. You must have so much charity and humility when you bring forth these arguments, especially when we're addressing, our lost cousins, especially when we're addressing even people who are, called to be, who are against us. You have to be so prepared, with this armor, and to be ready to be, your weapons is your humility and your charity. And I can't stress that enough. And one of the things that was kind of the enlightening thing for me, as I was shedding, remember I said that, vice and sin, I was just so tired of it. One of the greatest things that happened to me is I stopped being a miserable bastard, first and foremost to my wife and to my children, and being in a bad mood. Big deal. It's, there's going to be tough times in life. So, look at it like that way. And you need to prepare yourself, because another great book that I've read was by Dom Lorenzo Scopoli. He was a Venetian priest. He actually wrote a book, The Spiritual Combat. It's what DeSales carried with him and based his work on. And one of the key things that he always mentions in that book is that once you think that you're at the virtuous point, or you're strong enough and you're good enough, guess what? The demons have got you. They've convinced you. They've convinced you.
Another level, another devil.
Precisely. So, just don't lose hope. Don't despair. It's good to look out at the world. It's good to discern these things. It's good to make sense of these things. But there's going to be a time where you either need to back off, and you need to, really, go into yourself. So, off of soapbox. So back to the Gardens of Epiphany outside the walls. So I mentioned, it all starts at the altar with the communion. Some of the great things that Epiphany has is that we have this. Were you there for the coffee and donuts?
Yeah,
afterwards?
The fancy bagels and yeah.
I mean, that all runs by itself. I would invite anybody who comes to Epiphany. You can't walk in there. You walked in having been presented to other people already. It happened to me. It happened to a countless number of people. You can't walk in there new without somebody saying, good morning, hello, how are you? And it's not so much, it can be a bit like KC, who's grabbing you in and doing some ministry. But a lot of it is just, hey, man, have a seat, have a cup of coffee, have a donut. Just there's that sense of fellowship and community where, again, and this is the point I want to make, that Aaron brought this up. Another thing about Epiphany is that it's grown so much in the past 3-4 years, Aaron, is that correct? 3-4 years. We hardly know each other. I hardly know these backstories. I hardly know where they come from, but I see them Sunday in and Sunday out, and sometimes 2 times a week during Holy Week and things of that nature. I know I can say for myself, I think I can speak for others. We have so much affection for each other, just affection, because we spent so much time, first of all, in Mass, but other words, we have the Saturday Catechism, we have the Men's Holy League, we have other ministries that aren't just beer and brat sessions. They're catechism sessions, they're learning sessions, there's space to talk things out. And we're also guided by a fantastic pastor who would, I wouldn't have to say reel somebody in, but provides that guidance. You mentioned Dante earlier. I was a big Dante student, and one of the things that that one always wants to look for in their life with Dante is that with Virgil, when Virgil asks his guide, remember Virgil was one of the obviously a father figure to Dante, who lost his father very young. But Virgil chastised as much as he was charitable to Dante. He would, every time Dante would feel bad for a poor soul in the Inferno, you know what I mean? Virgil would be like, look, dude, they're there for a reason, okay? Let's slap, come on. And then there's other times where Dante, I forget what canto it was, I think it might have been Paolo and Francesca, he faints at the end. These poor people are in hell for the sin they committed, and there's a lot of humanity there, and he faints. And Virgil's there to kind of be like, hey, picks him up, gets him going. Come on, kid, we got some more downward treading to go. So there's so much space of that at Epiphany, and I can't tell you how important that is. And in special note, and I'll stop here for a moment. In respective to our men's ministries, I've said this to many people before. I think that so many families and so many men in particular are just one men's group away from coming back into the church. And that's even proto mass. They don't even have to go to a mass that they don't understand the language. That will come as well. But they come, they feel the fellowship, they understand the truth, because there is a lot of truth happening at our catechisms and at these sessions. So that's what really helps out and builds the community. It happened with me. I went to that men's group, and then I brought my wife, and I introduced her to all the men's wives who I met that night. And the next thing you know, 3 years later, we're friends. Yeah, that's how you build community.
I like everything you presented. That was great. I could go in so many different directions. Just a quick rehash is, we do want to learn about one of the big, this is just coming to me right now. I think one of the big realities that some people can't address is that there are people that are running things that don't have your best interests. That's one thing I think, just self-preservation, people need to learn. But when you do kind of go for whoever kind of goes into finding out these things, or I think one thing we could take away from tonight is balance it with some historical solid thing, whether you want to talk about Dante or Virgil or go on and on. And to me, like when I go too much into that, it just feeds you. It balances this information, and it just feeds your soul. And you talked about the life of the saints, and just good theology being lived out, Yeah. Mr. Aaron, how you doing over there?
Very good. I was hoping Michael was going to talk a little bit about how much he loved me, because I thought I was a great influence in his life, but we'll do that some other time. One of my hopes is when you bring in this locals, that a big win that'll come out of that, or an advantage, is will be a larger community of people like you were talking about, and where people can come and not feel left alone, can get some fraternal and sisterly guidance on how to deal with different things, because everybody has their own story, and there's somebody else out there that has a similar story that's made it through the other side. So I'm really looking forward to that. And I will say the one thing that got me, I think if people would spend as much time as they spend trying to figure out the hidden history, the mud floods, or flat earth, if they took as much time trying to figure out what they're doing and where they hid it all, to just try and understand what Christ meant when he said, Peter, you're a rock, and upon this rock I will build my church. And then again, if you have a problem with your brother, take it to the church. And then again, when Paul said, the church is the pillar and bulwark of truth. If you spend as much time, stop trying to grab scriptures and say, this is my problem. I have a problem with worshiping Mary. Somebody wrote that in the comment. We worship Mary in the sense of the old meaning of the word, because we
venerate.
We venerate, but the word, but you'll see it in old writings that we worship her, but not in a deistic sense. She's a creature. She's not God. You can't worship something that isn't God.
For the Mary thing, I'll just say, like, you learn to take little snippets, everything's out of context. The Catholic revelation is one, you have to, all this stuff is balanced out. But the Mary thing, to bear in mind, in the book of the Apocalypse, she's the Queen of Heaven. That's there. And another phrase, every generation will call her blessed. That's what we do.
That doesn't happen in the Protestant world.
She's the Queen of Heaven. There's a family. She has a special place as the Queen of Heaven, and so, and we have a tradition. It's a three-legged stool, and it's very alive from pretty much the first century, that she has an important place in this new heaven and the new earth, and in the kingdom of heaven right now. So she balances out the cosmic order. And you got to realize this is both East and West. It's not a Roman thing. This is all Christianity. Martin Luther, when he completely broke it up, I remember one time reading his book when I was a Protestant, like the Jews and their lies. I thought he was going to talk about conspiracy. He didn't. It's all theological. But he was, one of the things that really pissed him off is how these people would blaspheme the Blessed Mother. That just made him go irate. It took a couple generations. And Lutherans for like 100 years did confession. And it took a long time to pull away from the fullness of the faith until you get so far, everything's reduced so far in our culture and our learning and our social science models, that theology just becomes hey, let's just do Bible roulette. I'll do this and call no man father. But when you see the Catholic explanation in its fullness, it's quite mind-blowing, but you have to sit down and meditate on it and really kind of hear that. But not until you have an open mind. But when that's how the Protestant Reformation worked. They take these snippets out. People were literate and they had a sense of pride. And look at it, says right there, call no man father. Well, do you call your own father? Think about it. There's a reason we call Father Abraham. So there's a deeper meaning that Christ was getting at in that context. But when you just pulled those out, people said, oh, I'm able to read. That doesn't make sense. And now, when people are, after we have 30 to 50,000 Protestant, they're all kind of arguing, is there any one church that has this all fit together? And it's the Catholic faith. And it's because they can basically balance out all of these things and preserve the mystery. When you want to figure out the mind of God and unravel every mystery, at some point, that's why we do things like the Rosary. It allows us to preserve the mystery, which is a necessary part of our, as Protestants would say, sanctification process. Right. It's really, and part of being in the bosom is being comfortable in the tension of the ministry of the mysteries. And when I talk in my book extensively, both of them, about Eric Voegelin, he would always say essentially that's what's happening in modernity. Man cannot sit in the mystery anymore, and he's got to tear everything apart. And that's and that's what sola scriptura is, in short. It's self-idolatry. It's thinking that somehow you have the ability to work through all those tensions. You don't. You just don't. God left us with a church. And the church, even though it is corrupt as you can believe right now, in your community, wherever you live, if you go with an open mind, you'll find somebody, you'll find the people you need that will bring you in to the church and give you an RCIA class.
Or you'll be the seed.
Yeah. If Christ is calling you to do that, you'll find somebody along the way.
It's as easy as coffee and donuts sometimes.
Yeah.
It's as easy as coffee and donuts.
But yeah, it's just breaking that mystery and trying to figure, and that's what conspiracy does. And you're kind of, I hate to use this word like something that's ethereal, like a mystery, and kind of saying like raping it, but you're deforming it, and you're deforming reality. Voegelin would say, in the philosophical sense, you're deforming reality because it's held together. We live in a mystery between the immanent and the transcendent, between the heavenly and the earthly. The totality of reality is we have to do that. So modern science rejects the heavenly. With cosmology or anything else, it has its place. So it's a tender battle, and Christ spoke in parables to kind of help guide us along of all these mysteries and kind of to bring us into that. But the fullness of reality, that's why it's sacramental, is it is a balance, because Paul would say we can kind of see through it, like looking through a glass lightly. We can get an image of that beatific vision where it's all held together perfectly. But that's what the life of faith is about, is being comfortable in that mystery. We have all the information we need. And when we start deconstructing every last, I mean, because, eventually, when you do the conspiracy, it'll take you into Hebrew roots and then all the different avenues. But I think ultimately it's just, you become a victim of modernization. You're just an atomized individual trying to figure everything out. You can't, I feel like I'm doing apologetics right now, which is not my bag. But it's just a lonely, to be able to just read the catechism and go, aha, I got it. And just relax in the tradition. You don't have to rack your brain about that. It's just the comfort of being in the bosom of the church and allowing the fullness of the faith just to rush over you. And it's from the outside of the church. This is, as a Protestant, you see how atheists attack Protestantism. It's the same analogy. Protestants looking outside the Catholic Church through the stained glass, taking out these things out of context, living in your own echo chamber. And until you kind of cross that threshold, you're like an atheist trying to deconstruct the Christian narrative. Anyway, that's Michael. I want you to have the last kind of go round here. You did great today. I liked everything you did and how you put this together and used your literary motifs throughout. Excellent. Do some more. Finish this off.
What is the mystery of that you were just mentioning, other than another example of the hidden?
Yes. Exactly.
So,
and the whole fallen state is one big cosmic hiding spot, to tell you the truth.
So, I mean, again, sorry to be the broken record. The pill is going to be chalky and it's going to go down. You're going to have these moments where, you're taking in all this information about re-seeing the world, and it's okay. It's okay that you acknowledge the world that you have been in so far. I mean, let's remember that, God planted Christ right smack dab in the middle of the Roman world. He was meant to go to the Roman world and influence the Roman world. That's another part of some of the hidden elements about Saul. What were his parents' trades? They were tent makers. What were tents made out of? Skin. What did Paul do? He expanded the church. He built the churches. You know what I mean? What do you build on construction sites before you build actual buildings? You put up tents in the meantime while you're building the thing. So, I mean, again, it's this ever expanding thing. It's not going to happen overnight. Don't fret. Don't despair. Don't lose hope. Don't lose charity. Don't lose humility. Just keep on keeping on. This information is intellectually interesting and stimulating to go down. But, once Aaron asked me this the other day, he said, when do you know to stop? And for me, it's the last bit of half-conscious meditations that I have, thoughts in my brain before I fall asleep, after I've gotten rid of the practical, day in and day out work, family life stuff. What am I meditating on? Am I still fixating upon, the floodings and the prehistory and that type of stuff? Or am I thinking about, Saint Filippo Neri? Am I thinking about Peter Nolasco, who used to give, they would give themselves up to be prisoners? Am I preheating the warnings that Scopoli kept talking about? Every time, if you think you're there in virtue, guess what? He's got you. Those are the things. Don't despair. Don't lose hope. If you need to, take a step back, go back into the monastery, go back into the prayer room, go back into the scriptures. One of the things that I have, I don't know, what would be the right word for this? It's not a problem with, is not the word. I don't actually watch a lot of Catholic influencers on YouTube. I don't spend a lot of time there.
Good for you.
Well, I think that some of them are salient and good points, but
they are. I learn a lot. I do learn a lot from them.
But the problem is that if you're being catechized by those guys, that's maybe need to hit pause on that and then go What you should be doing is go what they're referring to in the good sense, you know. And I made this joke about the other day. It's like, you know, the one of the last things I don't think I've ever read the Summa. It's just too hard for me. That's one of the nice things about Aquinas, is that there's so many books about Aquinas that tell you about
secondary
Aquinas.
sources will get you by.
Secondary sources. So, you know, again, if you're having troubles, man, and if it's getting to be too much noise inside your head, just calm yourself, steady yourself. Again, pardon me, it's the host. Sorry, now my language starts coming. It's the host, it's the altar, it's the pulpit, it's the confessional. Outside of that, then go back into there, inside the monastery, so to speak, and then work your way back out into the fields. Then work your way back out into amongst the animals. You know,
excellent. I really, that's just to think about, because metaphorically the tissue of the metaphysical body really works. Last week, Raphael, I loved it, brought out the Legos as a model. Christ is the cornerstone, but we're part of the building structure of this thing that we're building. And Christ, you know, Aaron mentioned a bunch of our favorite proof texts that Christ started a church. He didn't leave, he left us with a church. Upon this rock, the bread of life discourse. Christ wanted us all to be one. And, you know, we could say in some kind of sense, well, we kind of believe in Jesus and whatever that can mean. Maybe we're Trinitarian, maybe we're not. In the church, we're all one because we partake of Christ's body and we find the unity there. When that hits you in its fullness, and you can live that out each week, that you're participating in the totality of this project, the mystical body, as it's always been historically, hierarchically, sacramentally. When you prepare yourself each week to become one with that, it's mind-blowing. You don't want to go back and hear a pastor in skinny jeans talk about his interpretation of what he thinks is in the Bible, and he's just one of many people. And so when you do that, and then on another level, if you can do it in Latin, and this is a frozen language, so the meaning was the same for 2,000 years, and you're participating in this grand convocation before you partake in the Eucharist. And when you really open up to that, it's mind-blowing. I got to tell you, I was standing next to Adam. He's a good singer. And to hear him, everybody, and the voices and the Latin was blowing my mind. But he's a good singer. I could hear him. He really had the he had the pronunciation down really well.
I mean, if like Aaron was saying, you know, instead of spending time on that, go back and learn Latin. It's been granted, I've got a couple steps ahead because of the Italian, okay? But I've gained so much by coming to this pure church language of the Latin. It's a not, I won't want to say sparse, but it's a very plain and simple and straightforward language. You know, Deus caritas est. You know what I mean? It's very simple. Or as I mentioned to Aaron the other night, because we all might wander away, just like Peter did. Petrus, quo vadus? You know, Peter, where are you going? So, you know, pay attention to your Latin, because the words are
I see your name up there. Sorry.
the going back to the true meaning of these things, like you know, you'll know what like I mentioned, the word buono and good had a bit of a different, you know, translation. You know, caritas has a different translation than love. There's a deeper meaning to it as in when you go into the Latin, perhaps even to the Greek. I don't have much experience with that as well. So, I mean, spend time looking at that. And, you know, once again, don't beat yourself up. And the point I was going to make earlier, sorry if I'm bringing it up again, I wanted to make sure I made this point, is, you know, the early church lived in many of our early fathers and saints. They all lived in a post or almost post Roman world. They had Roman culture and Roman things about them. And a lot of it got Romanized. That's why I started with my Peter thing, is that, you know, Peter ended up in Rome for a reason. Yeah. So when you start beating yourself up about our modern culture and America and Western culture and this and that, you know, don't despair too much. Yes, point out the bad things that you need to change, first of all, within yourself, again, in the monastery. But, you know, you are where you are, and you're placed where you are, just like they were in Roman times. Rome, the ancients got all baptized, so to speak. Aristotle got baptized by Aquinas. Don't you just can't think of that with this world we live in. You can't just dismiss it because I spent 50 years in this world. It has to make some kind of sense to me, good or bad.
We're here. God put us here for a reason. This time, that's what I got a lot out of Rene Girard, is that there's always another side of it. So as much as modernity kind of sucks, there's a whole nother kind of world that we can kind of see how we were put here in this time for a certain purpose. And you have to kind of focus on that part. And like you mentioned this before, just kind of on our day to day, this is not much about conspiracy freak out, but I live in a place that's so insane. The weather is for like this 4 months or something, so insanely hot. And you just have to kind of learn how to focus on something to get through it, because it's almost an uninhabitable climate that I live in. And yet, if you just allow it to beat you up, so you kind of think, well, how can I frame this spiritually? How is this part of the desert of my life? How can I take each day and what's God trying to communicate to me right now? And back to community, how can I use what I'm experiencing right now to benefit the people around me and make a contribution to the mystical body? Aaron, so nice having you aboard tonight, my friend.
Good talk.
Okay. Yeah, Michael, good job. Good job. Everybody at Epiphany has been marvelous. Absolutely marvelous.
It truly is. It truly is a special place. And I would just hope and encourage that other places are as much like this, if not more. It's a bit like that, what is the litany of humility. You know what I mean? I hope that other people are blessed more than I am. I hope other people become holier than I am, as long as I become as holy as I can be. That's really the wish of if all you non-Epiphany listeners out there, hopefully you have a bit of charity and humility. You listen to us going on and on and on about this, but it's just that we really want to show you an example. And this isn't an example it's a prideful example that, it's Aaron that he does this. It's Raphael that does this. It's Tim that does this. If you've listened to some of the other shows, no, it's this collective community. It just, the coffee and donuts just kind of happens. People individually do work on it, but it just happens. The different ministries just happen. There is not a lot of hierarchy involved. Again, like almost like the monasteries where you only had one abbot and everyone just did ora et labora.
Wow. Yeah, that's why we're doing this. And this is part of Aaron's vision, is that we want to take a slice of what you all are doing over there and present it to the world. And I like the way it's working out. So I tell you what, Michael, thank you for coming on. I like the thread. I like the walls. I like where you're going with this.
Grazie mille.
Yeah. And you're welcome back anytime. Aaron, my friend, thank you for coming on. And I guess you were doing a little, you're kind of paying attention a little bit on the side here. I'm still kind of learning about this stuff. All you all out there, I don't think we have our UK people. It's probably way late over there. But everybody over here in North America, probably especially, thank you for joining us. If you're watching this, a recorded version, thank you everybody for taking your time out and investing it here with our little community tonight. And we will be checking in with you real soon. I intend to get something going on with Will Tucker this week, and we're going to look at the synagogue and its sorceries. And the idea of this lecture or talk tonight, and what we're going to do is try to prepare ourselves, having our immune systems personally and with our communities built up. So when this wave of, we can predict it because they've happened, of these mimetic drives are going to come and try to push you in, prepare yourself, get yourself on a solid foundation, because the tides are coming in. So we're trying to prepare ourselves, and that's where we're up to. And that was part of Aaron's a vision of us doing this on Friday nights. So I'm going to say goodbye to everybody out there. And all you new people, thank you for coming on, and thank you for checking in with us. We're going to say goodbye for now,